Welcome to the first ever quick game review on Early Reviews, where we give the first impressions on games that just came out on Steam. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, otherwise let's get cutting. To Die was released on January 6th, 2021, made by John Lamont and John Braun. Personally, I like the pun on the name, and considering the type of game it is, I think it's a very apt description about what's about to take place. You will die. A lot. This game is easy to pick up, but definitely hard to beat. The game gives you 3 classes to choose from: a knight, a mage, or a rogue. All these classes have the same basic attributes of health, action points, and speed, or also known as movement, damage, defense, and accuracy. By playing the game and clearing levels, you obtain items that affect these stats in different ways, or even grant you additional attacks to choose from the other classes. These items and additional attacks change based on what classes you have chosen. As you progress through the levels, the game ratchets up the difficulty by not only consistently adding more and more enemies, but also making them stronger as well. The goal is to beat as many floors as possible without dying, and complete the story the game has. Nice and straightforward. Alright, let's move into the game itself, starting with the graphics. I love these graphics. The graphic style is outstanding for 8-bit. It's very simple, but it has a very effective way to convey exactly what you need to know while making the dungeon look really, really good. The characters and enemies are clearly defined, and still separate from the terrain, which is outstanding if I do say so myself. The game screams dark and foreboding dungeon from the title screen, but moves on to something a little bit more of a sprawling adventure as you continue to play. I would be remiss not to mention the music as well. I'm a sucker for a good 8-bit soundtrack personally, I know some of you others are as well, but I will say this soundtrack specifically goes above and beyond with the extra vocals and drums on certain levels and the title screen. Many an 8-bit soundtrack can be boxed in by just the idea of having to be 8-bit. The developers do a very good job of differentiating themselves from a standard 8-bit soundtrack, which I greatly appreciate. Unfortunately, this is where my praise for the sound ends, though. The sound assets are basically non-existent. Any sound effects for the main character or any of the enemies he fights, they just are not there. As I mentioned previously, the tracks are exquisite. I just wish they put a little bit more time and effort into the rest of the sound design of the game. One of my biggest gripes about this is that there are no sound effects for the thrown dice. In a dice game, I would imagine when you throw the dice, there are sound effects, whether it be the usual dice sounds or something else entirely. Doesn't really matter, I just wish there were dice sounds at all. Again, this game has barely any sound assets besides the background music, but the background music is outstanding, I will say it again. From this point, we're going to have to talk about the game itself. To Die is inherently a game based around RNG, which isn't a bad thing, might I add, but it is a concept that must be managed closely so that the player can also feel like they have a sense of agency in the game itself. The main issue I have with the game is that the RNG is not managed in a way that makes the player feel rewarded for playing the game and learning the enemies and items. A good RNG-based game, in my opinion, will allow the players to have what is called skill expression. That is to say, the ability to utilize the tools in the game and the knowledge that they have to be better and either beat the other players, if it's an online game, or beat the game itself in this case. I feel this game falls short in this area especially, which is a bummer considering how great the graphic design and soundtracks are. The game, however, is not devoid of skill expression. I would argue the 2 main forms of skill expression in the game are kiting enemies and the level rewards. I think both of these are done very well. I think the level rewards are well thought out and give the player choices that help them on their journey, as I talked about before. My main criticism here is the amount of rewards that you can have are capped, with no indicator in the tutorial before the game starts, or even in the game before it actually happens, that the items will be capped. I think this is a slight oversight on the game designer's part, and definitely a more frustrating aspect for me personally as I was playing. It kind of came as a shock, and definitely wasn't something I was prepared for. Mind you, I don't think capping the items is a bad idea. I just think it should be more well known or maybe done in a different way, possibly. A good way I was thinking about was maybe make an item available every other level. So that way you don't have to necessarily cap the items per se. You just make them less available in the early game, and by the end of the game you still have the same amount of items. I will say the dungeon itself has outstanding graphics, and you'll hear that a lot throughout this entire thing because I cannot hit that point home enough. But even in the dungeon itself, you'll see loot crates or chests in the dungeon that I wish you could loot for items. I think it would be very on theme and very rewarding for the player if they could actually loot these items. One last addition for these items might be adding a crit spot, which does more damage or applies an effect based on if it is hit or not. This would emphasize the skill of the player trying to line enemies up with this specific spot. Moving on to the combat is passable, however. Definitely for a turn-based dungeon crawler, it's very standard. I especially like the idea of losing extra action points or gaining back extra action points based on if you roll a critical success, which is a natural 12, or a critical failure, which is a natural 2. I think that was a very nice addition I heard they added right before the game was released. Great idea there. I still have a couple more things to say regarding this review. That being said, they don't really have a very good place to go, so I'm going to add them at the end here, just so that way they're still mentioned. Let's talk about being on low health. When you're on low health, the entire screen is tinted red. I disagree with this personally, but I understand the design choice made here. The reason I disagree with this is because the enemy movement boxes are red as well. This can cause issues when moving your character, and when you're on low health, those issues can mean death. I would suggest changing to a flashing health bar or health total instead. One of the main aspects of the game we haven't talked about yet is the story. The main reason for this is because the story basically isn't there. The main way they convey the story is through notes that you collect at the end of every level that you complete. This specifically is one of the few good aspects about the story because it brings you back to the game over and over again. That being said, I believe this method of telling a story is more for bonus content instead of a main storyline. You can read these notes at the main menu underneath the journal tab, which I think is a great addition, so that you can kind of go back and read the entire story together. I also noticed that you don't get all the letters in order. Again, adding that journal feature was a great idea in this regard, so that way, again, you could go back and reread everything in order. I just don't think this was the most concise way to convey the overall story and necessarily give you everything you needed. I also wish there was a little bit more of the story to convey. Now, replayability is also potentially an issue here. The leaderboard being personalized to yourself and not online means that you can only compete against yourself for a better level or score. I think if it was online, I think that'd be a great addition, so that way you can compete against other people, maybe add something to see their builds that they had or the luck that they got. Again, a great idea, I think. Again, this game doesn't have these features at this time. If they were added, I think I would definitely upgrade the rating of the game overall because of it. Also, I'd love to see an animation speed-up option. If you use the keyboard and keys themselves, you tend to go a little bit faster than the mouse, but some people don't want to wait for the animation to complete. Giving them an option to skip it would be a great idea as well. In conclusion, I believe the game has great soundtracks. That being said, the sound design is non-existent or extremely lacking in most cases. The graphics were a delight, and I wish the settings of the game were utilized more in the items and other areas. All in all, I think the game has great bones, a great foundation, and a great start. With a few quality of life changes and a bit more depth to the combat and item systems, I believe the game has the potential to be worth every penny of the $5 price point. As it stands currently, I believe it to be a little bit lacking in regards to the allure of replayability. If that were remedied, however, I think this game would be a must-have for the price point. My final verdict is a 6 out of 10. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. I hope this review helped you out in some way. Regardless, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Check out the rest of the vids. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next QGR. Bye!